a deafening explosion rocked the hidden valley, sending a massive wall of fire 30 feet into the dark sky. Trapped on a burning cliff with absolutely nowhere to run, an active-duty Navy SEAL and his highly trained German Shepherd stood between a group of terrified high school students and certain death. Just hours earlier, Xavier and Titan were enjoying a peaceful camping trip in the Cascade Mountains. Now, they are the only defense against a roaring, unstoppable inferno and a corrupt forest ranger who will do anything to keep his dark secrets buried in the ash. When the flames close in and the ground literally crumbles beneath their feet, will a soldier's combat training and a dog's unbreakable loyalty be enough to pull off an impossible rescue? Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from, and if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. The tires of the rugged Jeep rolled over the dirt road, crushing dry leaves and twigs. Xavier cut the engine and took a deep, slow breath. The crisp scent of pine needles and damp soil filled his lungs. He opened the door and stepped out. Xavier possessed the solid, muscular build of an active-duty Navy SEAL. A simple gray shirt clung to his broad chest, and dark cargo pants tucked into heavily worn boots. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the dense forest of the Cascade Mountains. "We are here, buddy. Come on out," Xavier called out. Titan leapt from the back seat, landing with a soft thud. The German Shepherd was a magnificent animal. He had a thick coat of black and tan fur, a strong jaw, and highly intelligent amber eyes. Titan immediately sniffed the perimeter, his ears swiveling to catch every sound. He was more than a pet. He was a highly trained partner who had accompanied Xavier on numerous combat operations. Xavier grabbed his heavy canvas duffel bag and a cooler. They hiked a mile away from the designated parking zone to find a secluded clearing. The silence of the woods felt heavy but comforting. Xavier unpacked his gear with the flawless efficiency of a soldier. He pitched a dark green tent, gathered dry fallen branches, and arranged a circle of smooth stones for a fire pit. Titan stayed close, holding a vigilant watch. Sitting on a fallen log, Xavier pulled out a small knife and began whittling a stick. Titan sat by his feet, watching the wood shavings fall. Xavier reached down and rubbed the dog behind the ears. For the first time in months, Xavier felt his shoulders relax. The constant roar of helicopter blades, the sharp cracks of distant gunfire, the tense briefings in dimly lit rooms, all of it faded away. Here, under the towering canopy of ancient trees, the world felt simple. A sudden burst of youthful laughter shattered the afternoon silence. Titan snapped to attention. His ears stood straight up, but he did not growl. Xavier put away his knife and stood up. Through the thick tree line, a group of teenagers marched up the main trail. They carried colorful, oversized backpacks and talked loudly. 2 adults walked at the front, leading the energetic group. Xavier decided to be neighborly. He whistled a low note, and Titan instantly fell into step beside him. They walked to the edge of their campsite. "Hello there," Xavier called out, raising a hand. The lead adult turned around in surprise. He was a tall, thin man wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a wide, friendly smile. "Oh, hello. I hope we are not making too much noise," the man said. "I am Mr. Davis. We are out here for a weekend camping trip with the local high school biology club." A woman stepped up beside him. She had a bright, cheerful face, and her brown hair was tied back in a messy ponytail. She wore a bright red hiking jacket. "I am Miss Collins," she added. "We try to drag these kids away from their screens and into nature at least once a semester." Xavier nodded respectfully. "I am Xavier, and this is Titan." The students stopped in their tracks, staring in awe at the massive German Shepherd. A boy with messy blonde hair and a restless energy stepped forward from the group. "Whoa, he is huge. Can I pet him?" the boy asked eagerly. "Take it easy, Liam. Do not crowd the dog, miss," Collins warned softly. "It is fine," Xavier assured them. "He is very friendly. Just let him smell your hand first." Liam extended a hesitant hand. Titan stepped forward, sniffed the boy's fingers thoroughly, and then gave a warm, wet lick. The tension broke immediately. The other students cheered and crowded around to scratch Titan's neck. Titan leaned into the attention, wagging his tail. Xavier watched the teenagers smile and laugh. He felt a profound sense of gratitude. Protecting this kind of innocent, everyday joy was exactly why he did his job. "You have a very disciplined dog," Mr. Davis observed. "Are you camping out here all alone?" "Just me and my buddy," Xavier replied. "I am taking a few days off from work to clear my head." "Well, we are setting up our camp just past that rocky ridge over there." "Let us know if you need anything," Miss Collins said, pointing toward a slight elevation in the terrain. "Will do." "You all have a great time," Xavier said. The biology club waved goodbye and continued up the trail. Xavier and Titan returned to the quiet isolation of their camp. The afternoon slowly dragged into evening. The sun began to dip, casting long, crooked shadows across the forest floor. Xavier sat by the unlit fire pit, reading a battered paperback book. Titan dozed in the dirt nearby. Gradually, Xavier noticed a change in the environment. The air grew uncomfortably dry. The wind began to pick up speed, whipping the pine needles high above. Xavier closed his book. The weather forecast had predicted calm, clear skies. This sudden wind felt wrong. He grabbed his metal water bottle and took a long drink. As he lowered the bottle, he realized the forest had gone completely silent. The birds had stopped chirping. The squirrels were nowhere to be seen. Only the howling wind remained. Titan suddenly woke up. The dog sprang to his feet, his body rigid, facing the east. A low, vibrating growl started deep in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Xavier asked, his voice low. Titan took 2 steps forward and let out a sharp, aggressive bark. Xavier instantly recognized the tone. It was the warning signal. Titan only used that specific bark when an immediate threat approached. Xavier dropped his water bottle. It hit the dirt with a thud. He walked over to his dog and followed Titan's line of sight. Above the distant tree line, the sky was transforming. It was too early for a sunset, yet the horizon glowed with a violent, unnatural orange hue. The bright colors pulsed and climbed higher, swallowing the pale blue sky. Then, the smell hit him. It began as a faint, bitter scent, like a campfire left burning unattended. Within moments, the wind pushed it harder, turning it into a thick, choking stench of burning wood and scorched earth. Ash began to fall from the sky, drifting down like dirty gray snowflakes. Xavier felt a cold rush of adrenaline flood his veins. The extreme dryness, the heavy wind, the panicked silence of the animals. It all painted a terrifying picture. A massive pillar of thick black smoke erupted above the eastern ridge, blotting out the sun. The orange glow intensified into a roaring wall of crimson and gold. "Wildfire," Xavier whispered. This was no ordinary brush fire. Driven by the fierce winds, the blaze was moving with terrifying speed directly toward their position. Xavier's heart skipped a beat as a sudden realization hit him. The high school group had set up their camp just past the ridge, right in the direct path of the inferno. Titan looked up, his amber eyes locked onto Xavier, waiting for the command. The peaceful retreat had evaporated in an instant. The calm woods were now a deadly battlefield. Xavier felt his military training take total control. His mind cleared of fear, leaving only sharp, focused clarity. "Let's move," Xavier ordered. He ignored his tent and camping gear. He quickly grabbed his tactical survival kit, a high-powered flashlight, and a coil of thick rope, securing them to his belt. Without another word, Xavier and Titan sprinted toward the ridge, running straight into the shadow of the burning sky. Xavier sprinted up the dirt trail. Titan ran beside him, his paws tearing at the dry ground. The wind howled through the trees. It carried a wave of blistering heat. The temperature rose with every step they took. Ash rained down thicker now. It coated Xavier's arms and stuck to his sweat. They reached the rocky ridge and looked down into the hollow. The biology club's campsite was in total chaos. Colorful tents flapped violently in the wind. The sky above them burned a fierce, terrifying orange. The main trail, the only clear path back to the highway, was already gone. A solid wall of fire roared across the dirt road. The flames swallowed entire pine trees in seconds. The dry wood popped and cracked like gunfire. Down in the campsite, panic took hold. Teenagers ran in random directions. Some screamed. Others stood frozen, staring at the approaching inferno. Mr. Davis, the tall teacher in wire-rimmed glasses, waved his arms frantically. He shouted for the students to group together, but the roaring fire drowned out his voice. Miss Collins, wearing her bright red jacket, grabbed two students by their backpacks and pulled them away from the burning tree line. "Everyone stay together," Miss Collins yelled. Her voice cracked with terror. Xavier knew they had only minutes before the fire surrounded the hollow completely. He charged down the slope. Titan followed right at his heels. "Titan, herd them up!" Xavier commanded. He pointed toward the scattered teenagers. Titan understood instantly. The German shepherd darted forward. He did not bark aggressively. Instead, he used his size and speed. He ran in wide circles around the edges of the camp. He nudged the terrified students toward the center. When a boy tried to run toward the burning trail, Titan leaped in front of him. The dog planted his feet and let out a sharp, commanding bark. The boy stopped, turned around, and ran back toward his teachers. Within seconds, Titan had gathered the entire group into a tight circle in the middle of the clearing. Xavier reached the center of the camp. He stood tall, projecting absolute authority. "Listen to me!" Xavier shouted. His deep voice cut through the noise of the wind and the fire. "Look at me! Look right at me!" The teenagers turned their heads. Their eyes were wide with fear. Tears streamed down their soot-covered faces. Mr. Davis and Miss Collins pushed through the students and stood beside Xavier. "The main trail is gone," Mr. Davis said. He gasped for air. "We cannot go back. The vans are trapped on the other side." "I know," Xavier replied. He kept his voice steady. "We are not going back. We are moving forward." Xavier pulled a heavy satellite radio from his tactical belt. He pressed the transmission button. Static hissed through the speaker. He switched channels. More static. The intense heat and the thick smoke interfered with the signal. He shoved the radio back into its pouch. He pulled out his cell phone. No service. "Are we trapped?" Liam, the boy with the messy blonde hair, asked. He trembled uncontrollably. "No," Xavier answered firmly. "We are just changing our route. Do exactly what I say, and we will get out of here." A deafening crack echoed through the clearing. A massive pine tree, fully engulfed in flames, crashed down near the edge of the camp. Sparks showered the ground. One of the green nylon tents caught fire. The synthetic fabric melted and burst into flames instantly. The fire crawled quickly toward the rest of the camping gear. "Leave the bags," Xavier ordered. "Leave everything. Bring only your water bottles. Move now." Miss Collins snapped into action. She helped the students drop their heavy backpacks. Mr. Davis counted the kids quickly. Everyone was present. The fire roared louder, creating a deafening wind tunnel effect. The heat became unbearable. It felt like standing directly in front of an open oven door. "Where do we go?" Mr. Davis asked. He looked at the wall of fire closing in around them. Xavier visualized the topographical map he had studied back at his camp. The highway lay to the east, but the fire blocked it. To the south and north, the forest grew denser and highly flammable. But to the west, the terrain dropped sharply. Deep in the forest, several miles away, lay a deep canyon. At the bottom of that canyon flowed the Whitewater River. Fire could not cross a wide, fast-moving river. The rocky walls of the canyon would provide a natural shield against the heat. "We head west," Xavier said. He pointed toward the deepest, darkest part of the woods. "There is a river canyon about 4 miles from here. We hike down into the canyon. The water will keep us safe." "4 miles?" Miss Collins asked. She wiped sweat and ash from her forehead. "Through the thick brush? We will never outrun this." "We do not have to outrun it," Xavier corrected her. "We just have to outsmart it. The wind is pushing the fire northwest. If we move straight west, we cut across its path. It will be hot, and it will be hard, but it is our only way out. Titan trotted over and stood by Xavier's leg. The dog looked up, entirely focused, ignoring the chaos around him. His calm demeanor helped settle the panicked teenagers. If the dog was not afraid, maybe they did not need to be either. "Line up in single file," Xavier instructed. "Mr. Davis, you take the rear. Miss Collins, you stay in the middle. Keep them moving. Do not stop for anything. If someone falls, you pick them up. Titan and I will take the lead." The students quickly formed a line. They coughed as the smoke grew thicker. The orange glow of the fire now illuminated the entire forest. It turned the green leaves into twisted black silhouettes. The air tasted like ash and burnt pine. "Let's move," Xavier commanded. He stepped into the dense underbrush, leading the way into the unknown darkness. Titan stayed right beside him, his nose close to the ground. Behind them, the biology club's campsite disappeared completely under a tidal wave of roaring flames. The heat pushed against their backs, urging them forward. Xavier set a fast, relentless pace. The survival of 20 people now rested entirely on his shoulders. He gripped his flashlight tightly and pushed deeper into the wild. The thick brush tore at their clothes. Thorns scratched their arms and legs. Xavier ignored the pain. He used his arms to break branches out of the way, creating a wider path for the students behind him. The ground beneath their feet was uneven and covered in hidden roots. He had to keep his eyes constantly scanning the terrain. A twisted ankle right now meant death. He glanced over his shoulder. The students stumbled, but they kept moving. Miss Collins offered words of encouragement, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "Mr." Davis pushed the stragglers forward. They were doing exactly what he asked. They trusted him. Titan suddenly stopped. The dog raised his head and sniffed the air, then turned slightly to the left, away from a thick patch of dry ferns. Xavier trusted the dog's instincts completely. "Follow the dog!" Xavier shouted back to the line. "Step exactly where we step." They adjusted their course, moving slightly left. A moment later, a burning branch fell from the canopy above, crashing directly into the patch of ferns they had just avoided. The dry leaves ignited instantly, shooting flames high into the air. Titan had smelled the heat building above them before the branch even snapped. Xavier wiped the sweat dripping into his eyes. The roar of the fire behind them was a constant, terrifying monster chasing them in the dark. But ahead, the forest was still quiet. They just had to keep walking. They had to survive the night. The forest lost all sense of time and direction. The canopy above no longer showed the sky. It only held a swirling mass of gray and black smoke. The fire pushed a relentless wave of heat against their backs. Xavier kept his eyes moving. He scanned the trees ahead and the uneven ground below. Every breath felt like inhaling warm sand. Behind him, the sound of violent coughing echoed through the line. The students were struggling. Their lungs were not used to this toxic air. Xavier raised his hand and stopped the group. He turned around. The teenagers looked exhausted. Their faces were black with soot. Some had tears streaming down their cheeks from the stinging smoke. "Listen up," Xavier commanded. His voice was firm but calm. "Tear a piece of cloth from your shirts. Make it large enough to cover your mouth and nose. Take your water bottles and soak the cloth. Breathe through the wet fabric. It will filter out the worst of the ash." Mr. Davis and Miss Collins immediately sprang into action. They helped the students rip the hems of their t-shirts. Water splashed onto the dirt as they hurriedly soaked the makeshift masks. Xavier watched them closely. He needed them to stay focused on simple tasks. Panic was just as deadly as the fire. He pulled his own bandana from his pocket, soaked it, and tied it around his face. He poured a little water into his palm and let Titan lap it up. The German Shepherd did not cough, but his sides heaved with heavy pants. "Keep the masks tight," Xavier instructed. "Do not take them off for any reason. We keep moving." The smoke grew denser near the ground. The wind pushed the toxic cloud lower, obscuring the roots and rocks on the forest floor. Worse still, the fire had already sent invisible threats ahead. Dry leaves covered patches of smoldering embers. Stepping on one would melt a hiking boot and cause severe burns instantly. Xavier realized his human eyes were no longer enough to navigate this terrain safely. He looked down at his partner. "Titan, find the clear path," Xavier ordered. He pointed forward. "Find the good air." Titan understood. The large dog stepped to the front of the line. He lowered his snout just inches from the soil. A dog's sense of smell is incredibly complex. Titan could filter through the overwhelming stench of burning pine and locate the faint, cool drafts of clean oxygen rising from the safe ground. Titan began to walk. He did not move in a straight line. He zigzagged, weaving a strange path through the trees. "Step exactly where the dog steps," Xavier told the group. "Do not deviate from his path. If he moves left, you move left. If he steps over a rock, you step over that rock." The group followed the dog in single file. Titan proved his value with every step. At one point, the dog suddenly stopped and backed away from a seemingly normal patch of dirt. Xavier picked up a heavy stone and tossed it onto the patch. The dry leaves instantly burst into flames upon impact. Hidden embers lay just beneath the surface. The students gasped. They quickly realized the dog was their only true guide through this minefield. They watched Titan's pause with absolute concentration. They hiked for another grueling hour. The heat drained their energy. Their legs felt like lead. Xavier maintained a steady, calculated pace. He could not push them too fast, or they would collapse from heat exhaustion. He could not walk too slow, or the fire would overtake them. He constantly checked his compass, making sure their winding path still generally moved west toward the river canyon. The sound of the wind suddenly changed. It shifted from a steady roar to a sharp, aggressive howl. The ground trembled slightly. "Look out!" Mr. Davis screamed from the back of the line. Xavier looked up. A massive, ancient oak tree stood directly beside their path. The fire had somehow raced through the upper canopy and consumed the tree's upper branches. The thick trunk was completely hollowed out by rot and fire. It glowed bright orange from the inside. The fierce wind pushed against the weakened wood. With a deafening crack, the massive trunk splintered. "Run forward! Move!" Xavier shouted. He shoved the students nearest to him forward. The flaming oak tree collapsed. It crashed onto the forest floor, sending a shockwave of heat and flying sparks in all directions. The thick trunk slammed directly into the middle of their trail. The impact created a solid, burning wall of wood and fire. It completely separated the group. Xavier coughed and waved the smoke away. He stood on the safe, western side of the fallen tree with the teachers and most of the students. But when he counted heads, his stomach dropped. 2 students were missing. "Liam! Chloe!" Miss Collins screamed in terror. She pointed toward the burning tree. Through the flames, Xavier saw them. Liam and Chloe were trapped on the eastern side. The fallen oak blocked their path forward. Behind them, the main wildfire rapidly closed the distance. The heat around the 2 teenagers was intense enough to ignite the nearby brush. They were boxed in. Chloe fell to her knees, crying uncontrollably. Liam stood over her, frozen in pure terror. "Stay here," Xavier ordered the teachers. Xavier did not hesitate. He ran toward the burning obstacle. The flames leaped 10 feet into the air. The heat blistered the skin on his arms. He searched for a weak point. Near the top of the fallen trunk, a large branch had snapped off, creating a small temporary gap in the wall of fire. It was extremely narrow and surrounded by flames. "Titan, with me!" Xavier yelled. Xavier took a hard-running start. He leaped with all his strength, diving straight through the fiery gap. Titan vaulted into the air right beside him, a dark shadow flying through the flames. They hit the ground hard on the other side, rolling in the dirt to extinguish any sparks on their clothes and fur. Xavier scrambled to his feet. He grabbed Liam by the shoulders and shook him hard to snap him out of his shock. "Listen to me!" Xavier shouted over the roaring fire. "You are getting out of here right now. Grab my belt. Hold on tight." He turned to Chloe. He hauled her to her feet and grabbed the thick straps of her backpack. He positioned them tightly against his sides. Titan stood ready, his eyes locked on the gap in the flames. The gap was shrinking. The fire ate away at the wood, closing the window of escape. "We jump together on 3, Xavier commanded. "Do not hesitate. 1, 2, 3, jump!" Xavier charged forward, dragging the 2 teenagers with him. They leaped toward the gap. Xavier used his own body to shield them from the worst of the flames. They crashed through the burning branches. Searing heat washed over them. They tumbled violently onto the dirt on the safe side of the tree. Titan leaped through an instant later, landing smoothly on his paws. Less than 5 seconds after they cleared the gap, the entire trunk shifted and collapsed further into the dirt. A massive fireball erupted, completely sealing the path behind them. Xavier stood up and quickly patted down Liam and Chloe to make sure their clothes were not on fire. They were bruised and terrified, but completely unharmed. Miss Collins rushed forward and hugged both of them tightly, sobbing in relief. Xavier looked back at the towering wall of fire. The eastern route was completely gone. They had no choice but to keep moving west. "Everyone up," Xavier ordered, breathing heavily. "We keep walking. Do not stop." Titan took the lead once again. The dog lowered his nose to the dirt and began to weave through the smoke. The group followed, leaving the burning oak tree behind as they pushed deeper into the dark, unforgiving woods. The group moved deeper into the dark forest. The intense heat from the burning oak tree slowly faded behind them. It was replaced by the chilling darkness of the untouched woods. Xavier kept his flashlight pointed firmly at the ground. He watched Titan's paws. The German shepherd moved with deliberate purpose. His nose stayed close to the soil. He found the safest paths through the thick brush. The students followed in total silence. Complete exhaustion replaced their earlier panic. They dragged their heavy feet. Every single step required immense effort. Their chests heaved as they struggled to breathe through their wet masks. Xavier checked his compass again. They were still heading straight west. The river canyon was their only hope for survival. "Hold up," Xavier said softly. He stopped walking and raised his right hand. The group halted immediately behind him. Titan stood perfectly still. The dog's ears perked up. Through the thick tree trunks, a square shape emerged from the darkness. It did not look natural. Xavier stepped forward. He shined his light directly on the structure. It was a small building made of heavy gray stone. A wooden porch stretched across the front entrance. A faded green sign hung above the heavy wooden door. It read, "Cascade Ranger Station 4. "A building," Mr. Davis whispered. He pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his sweaty nose. "Thank God. Maybe they have a working radio." Xavier approached the cabin carefully. He did not let his guard down. The massive forest fire was close, yet this station sat in complete darkness. There were no emergency lights. There were no sounds of human activity. He stepped onto the wooden porch. The dry floorboards creaked loudly under his heavy combat boots. Titan stayed pressed close to his left side. Before Xavier could reach the handle, the door swung open. A man stepped out onto the porch. He wore a standard green forest ranger uniform. A heavy two-way radio hung from his leather belt. He had short brown hair and a thick, dark beard. He held a high-powered flashlight. He aimed the beam at the ground to avoid blinding them. "Who is out there?" the man asked. His voice sounded surprisingly calm for the situation. "I am Xavier. I have a group of high school students and 2 teachers with me," Xavier replied clearly. He kept his hands visible and relaxed. "We were trapped by the main fire near the eastern ridge. We are heading west toward the river canyon." The man stepped forward into the ambient light of Xavier's beam. He looked at the soot-covered, terrified faces of the teenagers. He smiled gently. "I am Brody. I am the local forest ranger for this specific sector," he said. "You folks look like you have been through hell. Come inside quickly. I have fresh water." Miss Collins let out a loud sob of pure relief. She hugged the nearest student tightly. Mr. Davis let out a long breath and wiped his dirty face. The teenagers cheered weakly. They saw Brody as a true savior. A person in an official uniform meant safety. It meant the nightmare was finally over. Xavier did not relax his posture. He watched Brody closely. Something in his gut felt off. As Brody stepped down from the porch to help guide the students, Titan reacted. The German Shepherd stiffened entirely. The hair on his back stood straight up like needles. He planted his paws firmly in the dirt. A deep, menacing growl rumbled from deep within his chest. Titan bared his sharp teeth. Brody stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at the massive dog. "Whoa, that is a very big animal. Keep him back, please." "Titan, sit," Xavier commanded softly, but firmly. Titan sat down immediately, but he did not stop growling. His amber eyes locked onto Brody. He did not blink. Xavier observed this interaction closely. Titan was a highly trained military working dog. He encountered strangers on a daily basis. He never showed aggression without a direct command or a clear, present threat. Why was he reacting this way to a friendly forest ranger? "He is just stressed from the fire and the smoke." Xavier lied smoothly. He patted Titan's broad head. "Thank you for the water, Brody." The group moved into the dark stone station. The inside was very sparse. A large wooden table sat in the center of the room. Old topographical maps covered the stone walls. Brody handed out cold plastic bottles of water from a large cooler in the corner. The students drank greedily. Water spilled down their chins. They sat heavily on the hard floor, resting their aching legs. Miss Collins and Mr. Davis thanked Brody repeatedly for his help. "You are very lucky you found this place," Brody said. He leaned casually against the wooden table. "Heading west to the river is a very bad idea. The terrain gets way too steep in the dark. Someone will slip and break a leg. Plus, the wind is shifting soon." "Shifting?" Xavier asked. He took a slow sip of his water. "Yes." "The fire is going to jump the river canyon," Brody explained. He pointed a finger confidently toward the north. "But I have a large transport vehicle parked about a mile from here. We can take the small northern trail. It leads directly to an old, wide logging road. I can drive you all to the main evacuation zone. It is completely safe and clear." The students smiled brightly. A car ride sounded like heaven to their tired bodies. Mr. Davis nodded vigorously. "That is wonderful news, Mr. Davis said. "Let us take the northern trail. Give yourselves 10 minutes to rest, and we will head out," Brody said. "I need to grab some extra emergency gear from the back room." Brody walked away and disappeared into a small supply closet. Xavier stood up quietly. He walked over to the large topographical map pinned to the far wall. He pulled out his flashlight and illuminated the thick paper. He traced the green lines of the forest. He found their current location marked at the stone station. Then he traced the small northern trail Brody had just mentioned. Xavier's eyes narrowed instantly. He followed the dotted trail on the map. It snaked north for exactly 2 miles. Then, the circular contour lines on the map squeezed tightly together. The trail entered a narrow, deep gorge. It was a box canyon. High stone walls stood on 3 sides. There was only one way in, and absolutely no way out. The trail ended completely against a rock face. There was no logging road. Xavier quickly checked the wind patterns he had observed outside. The gale-force wind was blowing hard toward the northwest. That meant the main body of the fire was heading directly into that exact gorge. The narrow stone walls would act like a massive chimney. It would suck the flames inside and turn the canyon into a giant blast furnace. Anyone standing inside that gorge would be incinerated in a matter of minutes. Xavier looked back at the wooden supply closet door. Brody was not trying to save them. He was intentionally sending them into a death trap. He wanted them to burn alive. Titan walked quietly over to Xavier and sat by his right leg. The dog let out another low, vibrating growl, looking directly toward the closed closet door. "You smelled it on him, didn't you, buddy?" Xavier whispered. Brody smelled like diesel fuel and extreme stress. He was not a savior. The raging fire was no accident. This forest ranger had intentionally started the blaze. And now he needed to make absolutely sure there were no surviving witnesses left to tell the tale. Xavier turned off his flashlight. He slipped his hand down to his tactical belt. The rules of survival had just changed completely. The fire was no longer their only enemy. Xavier stepped away from the topographical map. He turned off his flashlight and slid it back into his belt pouch. Brody stood near the supply closet door. The ranger held a green canvas bag over his shoulder. "We are ready to go," Brody announced. He gestured toward the front door. "Follow me to the northern trail. The truck is not far." "No," Xavier replied instantly. He kept his voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. "We are sticking to the original plan. We are heading west to the river." Mr. Davis looked at Xavier in total confusion. He pushed his glasses up his nose. "But Xavier, the ranger said the northern trail is safe. He has a transport truck waiting." "The ranger is wrong," Xavier stated clearly. He stepped directly between Brody and the group of exhausted teenagers. "The northern trail leads into a tight box canyon. With the wind currently blowing northwest, that gorge will become a giant oven in less than 20 minutes. The fire will funnel straight inside. We are going to the river." Brody narrowed his dark eyes. The friendly, helpful smile completely vanished from his face. His posture grew rigid. "Listen to me, pal. I know these woods intimately. You do not. That river canyon is way too steep for a bunch of kids in the dark." "I can read a topographic map," Xavier countered firmly. "I am a Navy SEAL. I navigate hostile terrain for a living. I know exactly how to read contour lines. We are going west. If you want to take the northern trail, you can go alone. Miss." Collins sensed the sudden, dangerous tension in the room. She reached out and grabbed Liam by the shoulder, pulling the boy closer to her. The teenagers shifted uncomfortably on the hard stone floor. They trusted Xavier with their lives, but Brody wore an official badge and a uniform. They were torn. "We follow Xavier," Miss Collins said. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words were resolute. "He got us this far through the fire. We trust him." Brody clenched his jaw tightly. The muscles in his neck strained. He forced a tight, unnatural smile back onto his face. He nodded slowly. "Fine," Brody said. "If you insist on taking the hard way, I will come with you. It is my official duty to ensure public safety. I cannot just leave you out here." They left the stone station and stepped back into the nightmare. The heat hit them like a physical blow. The fire was gaining ground rapidly. The wind roared much louder than before. It sounded like a freight train rushing through the trees. Xavier took the lead position once again. Titan walked right beside his left leg. The dog kept looking back over his shoulder. He kept his amber eyes fixed directly on Brody, who walked at the rear of the line. The terrain grew significantly rougher. The ground slanted upward before dropping down into a series of rocky ravines. The air grew thinner and much harder to breathe. Falling ash coated everything in sight. It turned the vibrant green forest into a gray, dead wasteland. Xavier set a punishing, relentless pace. He wanted to put as much distance as possible between the group and the approaching fire. He also wanted to keep Brody moving constantly. A moving target is much harder to set up an ambush. Xavier gripped his flashlight tightly. He scanned the dark woods for any signs of movement. They climbed over a steep pile of jagged boulders. On the other side, the dense trees suddenly thinned out. The natural slope of the mountain gave way to a massive, artificially flattened clearing. Xavier raised his hand high to stop the group. He shined his heavy flashlight forward. The bright beam illuminated a scene of total destruction. It was not fire damage. It was human destruction. Hundreds of ancient pine trees lay dead on the bare ground. Their branches were completely stripped away. Their thick trunks were cut into uniform lengths. Huge stacks of timber sat waiting to be transported. Heavy yellow machinery sat idle in the dirt. Xavier saw bulldozers, logging cranes, and massive transport trailers. "What is this place?" Mr. Davis asked. He coughed heavily into his wet cloth mask. "Is this an official logging site?" "No," Xavier answered. He swept his light across the hidden valley. "This entire sector is protected government land. Logging is strictly prohibited here." Xavier walked further into the large clearing. Titan sniffed the dry ground aggressively. The dog stopped near a large pile of rusty metal drums hidden under a camouflage net. Xavier walked over and inspected them closely. They were 50-gallon industrial barrels. Several of them lay on their sides. Dark liquid soaked the dirt all around them. Xavier knelt down and touched the wet soil. He brought his fingers up to his nose. "Diesel fuel," Xavier said aloud. He looked around the sprawling camp. He saw dozens of chainsaws, extra fuel cans, and heavy steel cables hidden under large green tarps. Someone had gone through a tremendous amount of trouble to keep this illegal operation a secret from the sky. The steep rock walls surrounding the clearing perfectly hid the site from casual hikers and aerial patrols. Xavier pieced the puzzle together instantly. The sudden, violent start of the wildfire, the multiple ignition points he had noticed near the trail, the thick smell of fuel in the air before the smoke even arrived, and the helpful forest ranger who smelled exactly like diesel fuel. The fire was not an accident, Xavier said. He stood up and turned around to face the group. Someone started it on purpose. The authorities were probably getting too close to finding this illegal logging camp. The fire was meant to burn the evidence. It was meant to destroy the stolen timber and the machinery before any federal agents could find it. "You have a very sharp mind, soldier," Brody said from the shadows. The friendly tone was completely gone. Brody stood at the edge of the clearing. He held a black semi-automatic pistol in his right hand. He pointed the barrel directly at Xavier's chest. The student screamed in terror and scrambled backward. Miss Collins threw herself in front of Chloe and Liam to shield them. "Mister!" Davis froze entirely, his hands raised high in the air. Titan let out a vicious, deafening snarl. The dog lunged forward half a step, ready to attack the threat. Xavier snapped his fingers once. Titan held his ground immediately, his muscles coiled tight like steel springs. "Put the gun down, Brody," Xavier commanded. He kept his hands relaxed at his sides. He calculated the exact distance between them. It was 20 feet, too far for a physical disarm. "I cannot do that," Brody replied coldly. He looked at the terrified teenagers cowering in the dirt. "You were never supposed to be here today. This zone was supposed to be empty. I started the fire down in the valley to clear the area. I needed the fire to sweep through here and erase this entire camp. My buyers were getting nervous. The feds were asking too many questions. A massive wildfire wipes the slate completely clean. And the Northern Trail?" Xavier asked. He needed to keep Brody talking. He needed a split second of distraction. "It is a dead end," Brody confessed. He smirked maliciously. "I figured I would lead you all up there. The fire would trap you inside the gorge. You would burn with the trees. Tragic victims of a natural disaster. Nobody would ever know you found my little side business. You are going to kill innocent kids over stolen wood?" Mr. Davis yelled. His voice shook with intense anger and paralyzing fear. "I am surviving," Brody stated simply. "The fire is coming fast. I am leaving you all here. If you try to follow me, I will shoot you. If the dog moves an inch, I will shoot him first." Brody slowly backed away toward the dark tree line. The roar of the approaching wildfire grew absolutely deafening. The sky above the illegal camp burned a bright blood red. The unbearable heat pushed into the clearing. Xavier stared unblinking at the gun. He waited for the exact right fraction of a second to make his move. The heat inside the illegal logging camp reached an unbearable level. The towering pine trees surrounding the clearing burned like giant torches. Thick black smoke blotted out the sky completely. Bright orange embers rained down on the dirt. Xavier stood perfectly still. He kept his eyes locked onto the black pistol in Brody's hand. He breathed slowly and evenly through his wet cloth mask. Panic was a luxury he could not afford. His Navy SEAL training took over his mind, stripping away fear and leaving only cold, sharp calculation. Brody held the gun steady, but his eyes darted around the clearing. He was sweating heavily. The corrupt forest ranger knew the fire was closing in fast. He wanted to finish this quickly and escape. Xavier noticed a slight tremor in Brody's hand. Brody was a criminal. But he was not a professional killer. He was nervous. That nervousness was a fatal weakness. Xavier needed to exploit it. Xavier stood exactly 20 feet away from the barrel of the gun. That distance was too great for a direct physical attack. If Xavier rushed forward, Brody would easily shoot him before he covered half the distance. He needed a distraction. He needed Brody to look away for just 1 second. Xavier glanced down slightly. A thick pine branch lay near his right combat boot. It had fallen from the burning canopy above. One end of the branch glowed red-hot with smoldering embers. Xavier shifted his weight imperceptibly. He looked at Titan. The massive German shepherd stood beside him, muscles coiled tight. The dog stared intensely at the armed man. Xavier did not speak a single word. He did not issue a verbal command. He simply gave Titan a hard, focused look and twitched his left hand twice. It was a silent signal they had used 100 times in hostile territory. It meant to attack on his first movement. Titan's ears flattened against his head. He understood completely. "You cannot outrun this fire, Brody," Xavier said loudly. His voice cut through the roaring wind. "You shoot us, and the noise will slow you down. You will burn right alongside us." "Shut up!" Brody yelled back. He took a half-step backward. His attention wavered for a fraction of a second. Xavier executed his move. He shifted his weight to his left leg and kicked his right foot forward with explosive speed. His heavy boot connected solidly with the smoldering branch. He launched the burning wood through the air. It spun rapidly, sending a shower of bright orange sparks directly toward Brody's face. At the exact same instant, Titan launched himself forward. The dog moved with terrifying speed and raw power. He closed the distance in a blur of black and tan fur. Brody saw the burning branch flying toward his eyes. He instinctively flinched and raised his left arm to block it. The burning wood struck his forearm, scattering hot ashes over his jacket. But the distraction worked perfectly. Brody completely lost sight of the dog. Titan leaped high into the air. His powerful jaws snapped shut entirely around Brody's right wrist. His sharp teeth sank deep into the flesh and fabric. Brody let out a high, piercing scream of agony. The sudden, immense weight of the large dog dragged his arm downward. "Help him!" Liam shouted from the ground. The teenagers and teachers realized what was happening. Their fear instantly turned into desperate courage. Miss. Collins grabbed a large, jagged rock from the dirt. She threw it with all her might. The rock struck Brody hard in the chest. "Mister," Davis scooped up a handful of hard, dry dirt and flung it into Brody's face, blinding him further. The students quickly joined the fight. They picked up anything they could find. Stones, chunks of wood, and handfuls of gravel rained down on the corrupt ranger. Xavier sprinted forward. He kept his body low to the ground. He needed to secure the weapon before Brody could recover. Brody thrashed wildly. The pain in his wrist was blinding, but the adrenaline fueled his panic. He kicked blindly at the dog. Titan held on with unyielding strength. He shook his head violently, tearing at Brody's arm. Brody let out another scream. In absolute desperation, he pointed the gun away from the dog and squeezed the trigger. A loud gunshot echoed over the roar of the fire. Brody did not aim. He fired entirely by accident. The bullet missed Xavier completely. It flew past the group of teenagers and struck a pile of equipment covered by a green tarp. Time seemed to stop. Underneath that tarp sat a row of small red metal tanks filled with highly flammable chainsaw fuel. The bullet pierced the thin metal casing of the center tank. The friction of the hot lead ignited the volatile liquid inside instantly. "Get down!" Xavier roared. He dove sideways, tackling Liam and Chloe to the dirt. A massive explosion ripped through the logging camp. A terrifying ball of orange fire and black smoke erupted from the pile of equipment. The shockwave hit them like a physical wall of force. It knocked everyone flat against the hard ground. Heavy pieces of twisted metal and burning canvas flew through the air. The deafening boom left a loud ringing noise in Xavier's ears. The explosion created an instant, towering wall of fire directly between Xavier and the corrupt ranger. The flames shot 30 feet into the air, feeding fiercely on the spilled diesel fuel and the dry timber. The intense heat pushed Xavier backward. Through the thick, swirling smoke and the roaring flames, Xavier caught one last glimpse of Brody. The ranger had managed to rip his bleeding arm free from Titan's jaws during the blast. His uniform was scorched. He looked absolutely terrified. Without looking back, Brody turned and sprinted blindly into the dark woods, abandoning his illegal camp and his victims. Xavier sat up quickly. He patted his chest to extinguish a small spark on his shirt. He looked around frantically. "Titan! Here, boy!" The German shepherd trotted out from behind a large rock. His fur was covered in gray ash, but he looked completely unharmed. Titan sat down next to Xavier and licked his hand. Xavier stood up and checked the group. Miss Collins and Mr. Davis were helping the students to their feet. They were coughing violently and crying, but no one was seriously injured by the flying shrapnel. The wet masks had saved their lungs from the worst of the toxic smoke. However, their situation had just gone from terrible to catastrophic. Xavier looked at their surroundings. The explosion had scattered burning debris all over the hidden valley. The massive stacks of stolen timber were now completely engulfed in flames. The fire from the east had finally reached the edge of the clearing. The wall of fire from the exploded fuel tanks blocked their path forward. The fire had successfully surrounded them on all sides. The illegal logging camp had become a deadly, inescapable cage of roaring flames. The heat was growing exponentially. They were trapped, and the oxygen was running out rapidly. The heat inside the logging camp reached a critical mass. The explosion of the fuel tanks created an impenetrable wall of fire behind them. To the east, the main wildfire rapidly consumed the giant pine trees. Xavier knew they had less than 5 minutes before the entire valley turned to ash. He did not waste a single second thinking about Brody. His only mission was the survival of the people standing behind him. "Listen to me," Xavier shouted over the deafening roar of the flames. "We cannot go back. We are going down the cliff to the river." He scanned the scattered logging equipment. Near a massive yellow bulldozer, a thick coil of heavy industrial rope rested in the dirt. Xavier sprinted toward it. He grabbed the heavy coil and threw it over his shoulder. He ran back to the group. "Follow me to the edge," Xavier commanded. They pushed westward, moving away from the blazing fuel tanks. The ground sloped upward briefly before suddenly dropping off into total darkness. They reached the edge of the canyon. Xavier aimed his high-powered flashlight downward. The beam cut through the thick smoke and illuminated the sheer rock face. It was a brutal, vertical drop of nearly 60 feet. At the very bottom, the white rapids of the river violently crashed against jagged boulders. The sound of the rushing water offered a faint promise of safety, but the path down looked impossible. Mr. Davis peered over the edge and swallowed hard. "Xavier, we cannot climb down that. We do not have climbing gear. The kids are exhausted. We have rope and we have each other," Xavier replied firmly. "We do not have a choice." He looked at his dog. "Titan, find the path." The German shepherd stepped right to the edge of the cliff. He did not hesitate. Titan possessed incredible balance and agility. He carefully lowered his front paws onto a narrow, protruding rock. He tested the stability of the stone, then shifted his weight downward. The dog moved deliberately, finding natural ledges and hidden steps in the steep rock face. Within 2 minutes, Titan reached a wide, flat ledge near the bottom of the canyon. He barked sharply once to signal his safe arrival. "The dog found the route," Xavier said. "Now it is our turn." Xavier found a massive, deeply rooted boulder near the edge of the cliff. He quickly tied a complex, secure knot around the heavy stone, anchoring the industrial rope. He tossed the rest of the coil over the edge. It unrolled and dangled all the way down to the ledge where Titan waited. "Miss Collins, you go first," Xavier instructed. "You wait at the bottom and guide the students as they come down. Mr. Davis, you help me load them onto the rope here." Miss Collins nodded. She was terrified, but she trusted the Navy SEAL completely. She grabbed the thick rope tightly and stepped backward over the edge. She used her feet to brace against the rock wall, slowly lowering herself into the dark canyon. A minute later, she reached the bottom ledge safely. "Send them down, miss!" Collins yelled up from the darkness. Xavier worked with relentless efficiency. He grabbed the students one by one. He showed them exactly how to grip the rope and wrap it around their legs for friction. He positioned their feet on the edge and guided them down the first few feet. The students moved slowly, crying and shaking, but the fear of the approaching fire pushed them downward. The wildfire finally breached the edge of the clearing. The heat grew exponentially. Glowing embers rained down on the cliffside like fiery hail. Xavier stood at the very top, using his own body as a shield to block the burning debris from hitting the teenagers as they started their descent. Only 3 people remained at the top: Xavier, Mr. Davis, and Chloe. The young girl trembled uncontrollably. Her face was completely pale beneath the layer of dark soot. The roar of the fire paralyzed her mind. "Go, Mr. Davis," Xavier ordered. "I will bring Chloe down last." The teacher grabbed the rope and descended quickly. Now, only Xavier and Chloe stood on the burning cliff. A massive pine tree near the edge suddenly caught fire. The flames shot high into the night sky, casting a terrifying orange glow over the entire canyon. The heat blistered Xavier's exposed skin. "Chloe, look at me," Xavier said loudly. He grabbed her shoulders. "You have to grab the rope. We are leaving right now." Chloe shook her head violently. "I cannot do it. My hands are too weak. I will fall." "You will not fall. I will be right above you," Xavier promised. "Grab the rope." He physically placed her hands on the thick cord. He guided her to the edge. Chloe stepped backward, her boots slipping slightly on the loose dirt. She tightened her grip and began to lower herself down the rock face. Xavier immediately grabbed the rope directly above her and followed her down. He kept himself positioned just a few feet above her head, blocking any falling sparks with his broad shoulders. They made it halfway down the cliff. The river roared loudly below them. The fire roared violently above them. Suddenly, a large burning branch snapped off the cliffside tree. It plummeted downward, striking the rock face right next to Chloe. The impact sent a shower of hot sparks directly into her face. Chloe screamed in pure terror. She instinctively let go of the rope with her right hand to shield her eyes. The sudden shift in weight threw her entirely off balance. Her boots slipped off the wet rock. Her left hand lost its grip on the thick cord. She fell backward into the empty abyss. Xavier did not think. He reacted purely on military instinct. He let go of the rope completely. He pushed his legs hard against the rock wall, launching his body outward into the empty air. He fell faster than the girl. He stretched his right arm out as far as his shoulder would allow. His fingers clamped down hard around her wrist, just as she tumbled past him. With his left hand, Xavier blindly grabbed for the dangling rope. The rough fibers burned through the skin of his palm, but his grip held firm. The sudden, violent stop nearly ripped his left shoulder out of its socket. Intense, blinding pain shot down his spine. Xavier gritted his teeth and held on. He dangled 30 feet in the air by one arm. His other arm held the entire weight of the terrified teenager. Below them, the sharp, jagged rocks waited hungrily. Above them, the inferno raged on. Chloe screamed and kicked wildly in the air. "Stop moving!" Xavier roared. His voice echoed off the canyon walls. "I have you. Do not move." Chloe froze, hanging suspended in the dark. Xavier breathed heavily. His muscles burned with agonizing pain. Slowly, using every ounce of strength in his heavily trained body, he bent his left arm. He pulled himself upward, dragging Chloe with him. He swung his legs forward and planted his heavy boots firmly against the rock face. He secured his footing and pulled Chloe tight against his chest. He pinned her body safely between himself and the solid stone wall. "Grab the rope again," Xavier grunted, his voice tight with pain. "Use both hands. We are almost there." Chloe reached out trembling hands and grabbed the rope. Xavier kept one arm firmly around her waist. Together, they slowly descended the remaining distance. Their boots finally hit the flat, solid rock of the lower ledge. Titan immediately ran over, licking Xavier's hand. "Miss." Collins rushed forward and pulled Chloe into a tight embrace. The rest of the students sat huddled together on the ledge, staring in awe at the Navy SEAL who had just caught a falling girl in midair. Xavier let out a long, ragged breath. He looked up at the top of the cliff. The entire edge of the canyon was now a solid wall of bright orange fire. The illegal logging camp and the terrifying forest ranger were gone, completely swallowed by the inferno. But down here, in the dark, cold canyon, they were finally safe. The ledge at the bottom of the canyon felt like a different world. The deafening roar of the wildfire still echoed high above them, but down here, the sound of the rushing river dominated the air. The temperature dropped significantly. The massive rock walls of the gorge blocked the intense heat. Xavier carefully let go of Chloe. The young girl immediately collapsed onto the hard, wet stone. She wrapped her arms around her knees and sobbed into her chest. "Miss," Collins knelt beside her and held her tight. "You are safe now, Chloe," Miss Collins whispered. "We are all safe." Xavier turned his attention back to the cliff. The entire upper rim glowed with a terrifying orange light. Burning debris occasionally fell from the sky, hissing loudly as it hit the cold river water. The fire could not reach them down here. The wide river created an absolute natural barrier. "Everyone, move closer to the water," Xavier commanded. His voice sounded hoarse from the smoke and exhaustion. "Stay away from the rock wall. Falling embers can still hurt you." The students and teachers obeyed instantly. They crawled over the smooth, slippery stones and waded into the shallow edge of the river. The water was freezing cold. It shocked their exhausted bodies and washed away the thick layers of gray ash and soot. Liam cupped the water in his hands and splashed it over his face. He let out a long sigh of relief. Xavier walked over to the riverbank and sank to his knees. The adrenaline slowly left his system. The sharp pain in his left shoulder flared up intensely. Catching a falling person in midair had severely strained his muscles. He ignored the pain. He dipped his hands into the freezing water and scrubbed his face. Titan trotted over and stood beside him. The massive German shepherd lowered his head and drank greedily from the river. Xavier reached out and stroked the dog's wet fur. "Good boy, Titan," Xavier said softly. "You did perfectly." Mr. Davis waded through the shallow water and stopped next to Xavier. The tall teacher looked completely exhausted. His wire-rimmed glasses were cracked and covered in dirt. "I do not know how to thank you," Mr. Davis said. His voice shook with genuine emotion. "You saved every single one of us. That man up there, Brody, he was going to let us burn." "He made a choice," Xavier replied flatly. "And the fire caught up to him. We survived because we kept moving. Do not focus on him anymore. Focus on the kids." Mr. Davis nodded slowly and returned to help Miss Collins check the students for minor burns and scrapes. Xavier stood up and analyzed their new environment. The canyon was incredibly deep. The steep rock walls towered hundreds of feet above them. The wind funneled violently through the narrow gorge. This wind pushed the thick smoke upward and away from the river surface. Directly above them, a small patch of clear night sky remained visible. They were safe from the flames, but they were still trapped at the bottom of a massive ravine. Hiking out in the dark was impossible. They had to wait for rescue. Hours passed slowly. The teenagers huddled together for warmth on the cold stones. The freezing river water kept their body temperatures uncomfortably low, but it prevented heat stroke. Xavier sat awake on a large boulder. He kept a constant watch on the burning cliff above. Titan slept soundly near his boots. Eventually, the dark sky began to lighten. Dawn broke over the Cascade Mountains. The morning light revealed the true scale of the devastation above. The beautiful green forest was completely gone. In its place stood a blackened, smoking wasteland. "Look!" Liam suddenly shouted. He pointed a shaking finger up at the sky. A rhythmic, heavy thumping noise echoed down the canyon walls. It was not the wind. It was the distinct sound of helicopter rotor blades. Xavier jumped into action. He needed to create a highly visible signal. The gray rocks and dark water provided terrible contrast. "Miss Collins, I need your jacket," Xavier said quickly. The teacher did not hesitate. She stripped off her bright red hiking jacket and handed it to him. Xavier grabbed a long, smooth piece of driftwood from the riverbank. He tied the red jacket securely to the end of the wooden pole. He climbed to the highest boulder near the water edge. He waved the red flag violently back and forth. "Hey!" the students screamed at the top of their lungs. They waved their arms frantically. A large yellow and blue Coast Guard search and rescue helicopter suddenly appeared over the canyon edge. It hovered high above the river. The downwash from the massive rotors whipped the water into a wild frenzy. The pilot spotted the bright red jacket immediately. The helicopter slowly descended into the wide gorge. It hovered about 50 feet above the river surface. A side door opened, and a rescue swimmer in a bright orange suit waved down at them. A metal rescue basket began to lower slowly on a thick steel cable. "Teachers and students go first," Xavier ordered. "Load 2 at a time. Keep your heads down." Miss Collins and Chloe climbed into the metal basket first. The cable hummed as it pulled them up to the hovering aircraft. The process repeated itself multiple times. Mr. Davis and Liam went next. Slowly but surely, the entire biology club was hoisted to safety. Finally, only Xavier and Titan remained on the wet stones. The rescue basket lowered one last time. Xavier grabbed Titan by his heavy tactical harness. He lifted the large dog and placed him securely into the basket. Xavier climbed in right behind him. The winch motor pulled them upward. Xavier looked down at the cold river and the smoking cliffs one last time. The nightmare was finally over. Inside the helicopter cabin, the noise was deafening. A rescue medic immediately handed Xavier a thick wool blanket. The teenagers sat lined up against the wall. They looked battered, bruised, and covered in dirt. But they were smiling. The medic tapped his radio headset and leaned close to Xavier. "Local police found a body near the explosion site up top," the medic shouted over the engine noise. They identified him from his badge. It was a forest ranger named Brody. "Looks like he got caught in his own trap." Xavier nodded once. He did not feel any sympathy for the corrupt ranger. The forest had executed its own justice. Chloe unbuckled her seatbelt. She walked across the shaking cabin and threw her arms around Xavier's neck. She hugged him tightly. "Thank you," Chloe yelled over the rotors. "Thank you for not letting me fall." Xavier returned the hug gently. He looked at the relieved faces of the teenagers and their teachers. He looked at Titan, who sat calmly beside him. He had come to these mountains searching for peace and quiet. Instead, he found a raging inferno and a deadly battle. But as the helicopter banked away from the ruined forest and flew toward the bright morning sun, Xavier felt a profound sense of purpose. He had done his job. He had protected the innocent, and he would always be ready to do it again. The story of Xavier and his loyal German shepherd, Titan, reminds us that in the darkest times, courage and a clear mind can guide us through the fiercest storms. It shows that true strength is not just about physical power, but the willingness to put the safety of others before your own life. I truly believe that heroes do not always wear capes. Sometimes they wear combat boots, or even have 4 paws and a brave heart. Their unwavering dedication inspires us all to be better, to protect the vulnerable, and to remain calm when panic tries to take over. If this story touched your heart, please share it with your family and friends. Leave a comment below telling us what you admire most about Xavier and Titan, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring and heroic stories. May God bless you and your loved ones with endless safety, peace, and the courage to face any challenges that come your way. Please type Amen in the comments if you believe in the power of faith and protection.